Awesome. So let's get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Women in Data Science Vancouver 2021.
Okay, so let's get into our panel discussion today. As in the interview, first of all, I would like to introduce our moderator today, which is Khaulat Ayomide Abdulhakeem. Khaulat is a tech career coach and product consultant at DiverseK, where she helps students and recent graduates navigate their dream tech careers and build products. She has a background in machine learning research, where she researched machine vision, reinforcement learning, and robotics. So with that, I will hand over the mic to Khaulat to introduce our panelist. Welcome, Khaulat.
Yeah, thanks for the warm introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm Khaulat. I'm the Abdulhakeem, and I'm excited to be moderating this session today. And yeah, we have amazing panelists. So I'm just going to introduce them real quick. So Claire's son is currently a product analytics manager at Atlassian, and she has spent the last year partnering with the Jira software product teams by helping them measure the impact of their work, all while mentoring a fast-growing analytics team. Recently, she's transitioned into an analytics leadership role at Trello. Claire has been in the technology field for over 10 years, and she's worked in consulting where she helped large enterprises wrangle their data. And prior to joining Atlassian, she has helped build data ecosystems and analytics discipline from ground up at Upbounce. In her spare time, she loves to bake and garden, and recently moved internationally twice during COVID. So yeah, everyone, welcome Claire's son, who will be joining us today as a panelist. Okay, the next panelist we have here is Jess Ford, and she's currently a senior machine learning engineer at Square. She is a sponsored snowboarder turned astrophysicist turned data scientist. So she's transitioned a lot, and she enjoys applying Python data science tools to a wide variety of problems and teaching skills and best practices to others. Jess completed her PhD in physics at UBC Vancouver in 2015 and currently works remotely for Square as a senior machine learning engineer. At the moment, she's based out of Salt Lake City, where she spends her free time exploring the Wasatch Mountains on snowboard, mountain bike, and foot. Jess also organizes the Salt Lake Pi Ladies chapter and the local Women in Data Science Vancouver. So everyone, welcome Jess. And lastly, we have Tessa. Tessa G works for an autonomous driving company, and she graduated from MIT with a master's degree in financial engineering and started out as a quantitative analyst for T. Rowe Prince before starting her career in data science. As a data scientist, she previously worked for the consulting firm McKinsey and Company, serving clients across various industries, and is currently working in the tech industry as an autonomous driving company. She also writes on Medium and also about data science related topics, including interview tips based on her own experience, and as both interviewee and interviewer at top consulting firms, thanks as well as high paying startups. So yeah, everyone, these are the three panelists that I'll be talking to today, and we'll be talking all about acing the technical data science interview in general. So I'm excited to have everyone. I'm excited to be here. So thanks, everyone.
All right, Khaulat, you can start the panel discussion now. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. So yeah, so we'll just get started right now. Okay, just to jump right in, I'll start with asking Claire what with her experience building different data ecosystems, how she would describe a data analyst role. So this is just to help us understand the different roles under data science in general, and yeah, so we can have a good base. So Claire, please, could you how would you describe a data analyst role?
Yeah, totally. I think it's a good question, but it's also a hard question to answer just because I think the names of the roles that are being used in the industry keep changing. Data is such a fast growing field
Yeah.
that once, BI was something that was used a lot before, now we are using, machine learning and data science. And I would recommend at the very least for folks to really read through the job description and get a better sense, just because a role title at one company will be very different. From my experience, at least, though, I'll talk a bit about data analytics and data science. So the way that I look at it is a data analyst or data science is there to help measure the impact of whatever the company is doing, whether that is a marketing campaign or a new feature they launch or something that they did. At the end of the day, we're there to help measure the impact with data. So that could be building a dashboard, that could be running a model, that could be running experiments. It's a pretty big gamut. When it comes to ecosystem building, though, a lot of the times our data, unfortunately, is not clean and perfect. So there is times where you're also responsible for kind of, massaging, cleaning, and building your pipelines as well. But that's sort of the gamut of a data analytics or science job that I've seen in my career.
Okay, quite interesting. Okay, Jess, as a senior machine learning engineer, how would you describe your role at Square?
Yeah, I'll just start by completely echoing what Claire said about there being so much variety within any of these job titles. So, I mean, I would still consider myself a data scientist with the type of work I do currently, but it is machine learning focused. So Square has a very large machine learning and data science org. So they've gone down this path of kind of specializing roles. So people with the title data scientist in my org are more focused on the analytics and the products and the visualizations and dashboards, and people with my title in the machine learning roles are really focused on modeling. So building my role involves building natural language models to try to automate some of the customer service requests that we get for people who are using Cash App. I know you don't have Cash App in Canada, but in the US it's like a peer-to-peer money sending application. So people will write in with messages and we try to model the types of problems they're having to automatically provide them help. And I also say, even within machine learning engineer at Square, there's even kind of two separate roles. So my role is on the modeling side, but there's also machine learning engineers that are more focused on the infrastructure side, that are building the platforms where we serve models and get signals in production and stuff like that. So lots of different stuff.
That's quite interesting. What was your transition journey like, from being a snowboarder and an astrophysicist to data science? What was it like?
Yeah, so I still snowboard all the time, but not competitively. I did that a lot during my undergrad, but I also got involved in research at the time and decided to apply to a PhD in a place where I could still snowboard a lot. So I came to Vancouver and did my PhD at UBC, which was great. But about halfway through, I realized that I probably wanted to shift gears into industry. I wanted to have the life freedom to live where I wanted and do what I wanted without being tied to a university. So I started trying to learn about data science. I had met a few people who had transitioned, and I started kind of doing side projects and studying the aspects of data sciencey stuff that I didn't really touch in my physics PhD. And I eventually had to do a postdoc before I did got an actual job in industry. So I did a data science postdoc in Seattle at the University of Washington before I got my first job in industry.
Yeah, quite interesting. Actually, very interesting. Not a straight transition. Yeah, but a very good one. Okay, let's have Tessa tell us what her role as a data scientist is like.
Yeah, for sure. So again, just to echo what everyone has said so far, definitely when it comes to kind of the role name is very, very different across different company, but a lot of overlap. I would also add on especially when you read a job description, also look at the size of the company. When it comes to smaller startups, you really, as a data scientist, you also work on data engineer, kind of the pipeline building in the background, as well as building dashboard and analyze metrics. Kind of yearly in a bigger company would be called data analyst. So in smaller companies, definitely the line blurs a little. And in bigger companies, though, especially
I guess like bigger consulting firms, usually you would see a team staffed with like data engineer who are like just strictly in charge of pipelines, and data scientists building models, like Jess said, and then data analysts kind of in charge of like the business communication as well as like metrics. So my role in my company right now, since we're kind of like still a small startup, even though like a lot of people think we're pretty big already, but compared to McKinsey, where I used to be, is still small. So my role, it's still like building models as well as like building dashboard and analyze metrics to communicate to business, and occasionally still needs to clean the data and then like build data pipelines in the background.
Okay, so this data, how does it work in autonomous driving systems? How is it applied to autonomous driving?
So it's everywhere. If you think about like how even for, so basically for data analysts, if you think about how the like traditional data analyst role work, right? They need to analyze metrics and communicate to business. And eventually autonomous company is a business. Like we're going to launch some kind of ride share, or like maybe partner with someone to deliver grocery or deliver food. So in that sense, we're business. So a lot of like metrics still needs to be analyzed and defined and communicate to business. And then on the engineer side, we have core data scientists who will be building models. If you think about like, how do you detect a person on the road? This kind of perception and prediction, those are all data scientists building models to do all of that.
Yeah, thanks, Tessa. Yeah, we've talked about how these roles actually differ, even though they are all related to data one way or the other, but they differ because it's a very wide field, right? Right. So now we're just going to look at the general must-haves for anyone in any of these roles. So like whether you're a machine learning engineer, whether you're a data science developer, what quality should you have for any of these roles generally? So anyone, Claire, can you please answer to that?
Yeah, sure, I could start. I think that it might be helpful to kind of explain how they differ. And I think it's two ways. One is the focus area. So, you know, whether they're focused on a specific part of the business, whether it's like marketing, growth, product, or other else. And then the other thing that I look at it in terms of how it differs is your tools that you use. So whether it's you're using sort of more elementary tools like SQL or higher level dashboarding, or, you know, more sophisticated modeling. I think regardless, in all of those sort of different roles and focuses, like a curiosity and a sense of learning. The field is changing so fast. There's always new stuff coming up. But I think sort of that drive for continuous improvement and learning is definitely one of the must-haves, I think, generally speaking, for data, really.
Yeah, Jess, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say like what's the core things that everybody needs, because I think these fields, you know, like they're evolving, but there's just like there's too much to know. There's like there's so many things that you can't be an expert on all the areas under the data science umbrella. And so you definitely want to, you know, have some, you know, programming skills, and depending on the job, it might be more SQL, but it might be more Python or R or something else. And it's good to have, you know, some statistics foundation. And some roles you're going to be doing a lot more statistics and a lot more analysis where that's more relevant, and other jobs maybe a little bit less of that. But that, I think that's like kind of a general good skill set that you need across the board. Otherwise, machine learning is useful, but it's not useful in every different kind of data science role. But it's probably good to have like some familiarity and some comfort with like some of the basic algorithms that you might use.
Yeah. Would you like to add anything to that, Tessa?
Yeah, so I would probably add on top of like hard skills, like Jess just mentioned, you know basic coding. Once you pick up one coding language, it's probably easy to pick up another one. So it doesn't matter if your company is using R, Python. If you know some basics, it's probably pretty easy to switch. So on top of the hard skills, though, I would say kind of build a business acumen and like mindset. because at the end of the day, all of us are working for businesses, right? So it doesn't matter if you're like core data scientists who are building models, or data engineers who are building data pipelines, who are seemingly to be in the background, but really in the end of the day, you need to communicate to someone in the business and tie it back to business impact. So it's really important to build up that mindset and always think about what does that mean to the business, and stuff like that. So it's the soft skills that you probably add.
Yeah, yeah, very important. Okay, so yeah, let's move on to like the next important thing. Where do you even find data science jobs, right? Before you have to get a job before you can interview. So Tessa, you've interviewed for top consulting firms, companies, and startups. How would you describe the current job market in North America and globally?
Yeah, very interestingly. So I think I would say data science is one of, like, at least in the States, as far as I see, is one of the field that didn't really get impact much by COVID. So I think right now it's still a really popular industry, and everyone's trying to get into data science or data analyst or business analyst, whatever you call it. You can just see that by like driving on the highway and you see like a bunch of advertisement for different master's degrees in business analytics. So still a lot of companies are looking for talent, top consulting firms, startups, everyone needs data scientists. Yeah, so that's a general market, but I would say like, in general, even though a lot of people on paper seems like they have the requirement, during the interview, you still need to like, kind of prepare. I guess we'll get into it, but like during the interview, there are a lot of preparation probably goes into it. And then in order to get this, a seat in the company.
Okay. All right, yeah. Jess, what would you say about online job platforms like LinkedIn Jobs, Indeed, Glassdoor? Would you say they are good places to find data science jobs? And which one would you recommend?
I always just start with Google. I just Google for jobs. I'll, Google like data science job Salt Lake City or whatever, or data science job remote. And then that'll usually take me down, paths into Indeed or Monster, and some of those are okay. I think, especially if you have an idea of places you want to work at, it's good to start like at those companies' websites. So that's usually what I'll do is I'll have an idea of a few places that I have a good impression of, and I'll just go to their websites because that's usually a little more up to date. Another site that I like, Stack Overflow, actually. I'm on that all the time, obviously, like writing code. It's still like always there, and there's always jobs that pop up. So there's good stuff there. But I was going to mention, if you're interested in remote jobs, I always follow remoteok.io. They don't have a ton of stuff, but it's something I kind of just like keep an eye on because I like the freedom to work remotely and move wherever I like.
Yeah. What would you say about this, Tessa?
Yeah, I would echo that. I usually start with Google, but also a heavy user of LinkedIn when it comes to job search. And like LinkedIn would kind of tailor to your interests. You can subscribe to, if you say like I'm interested in San Francisco data science areas, it will periodically like send you different jobs, and it has like pretty neat function where you can indicate in the background to recruiters that you're actually looking for jobs, so they will reach out to you. You see a lot of like reaching out from headhunters and recruiters from different companies on LinkedIn. That happens a lot on LinkedIn. And then another format, I think we'll get into it in detail later. It's probably like, talk to your connections if you have people who are working in that company already. Internal referral, at least from my experience, is kind of like also treated a little bit differently in the background from like the recruiter round, gonna get pushed to the front a little bit faster. So.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Claire, how would you advise a student, to best position themselves for university recruiting? Because like this is one of the fastest ways you can get a job right out of school. So how can a student position themselves to actually get this opportunity?
Yeah, totally. I think a lot of it comes down to motivation. So sort of expressing why you're interested and getting to learn more. Like Tessa said too, like don't worry about, like, use your network. If you know folks who are working at certain industries or places that you already know, or companies that you would like to work at, reach out and use that. So I think it's a lot of it is you are competing with folks who have very similar education and backgrounds and stuff like that. So I think a lot of the times when I look at university grads, it's sort of, why our company, what's interested, and why are you sort of interested to learn? So to make that really clear, make that motivation very clear, and why you've picked them.
Yeah. Okay. And what is the nature of jobs on these different online platforms that we talked about initially? So in terms of internships, part-time roles, contract or full-time roles, is there anyone that favors any job most? Tessa?
Yeah, totally. So in my experience, I think like internship is probably easier to get through if you have a career service at school. Like they probably like invite alums back to speak to you guys about their company, and at least I got my internship through that. And on LinkedIn, I see mostly like contractor and full-time jobs. But also that's probably because the function that LinkedIn had to tailor the job to me, so I don't see internships anymore. You never know. I never like went out of my way to search for internships on LinkedIn. But I think on Google though, you can pretty much search for anything, and there will be like 1 or 2 opportunities at least pop up fit your search.
Yeah, I would like to add to that. LinkedIn has this feature that you can actually tailor down your search. So you can search for internships, you can tailor it down. If you're looking for data science internships, you can always like search for it, and it brings these different roles. You can also choose the location you're trying to search for jobs for also. And you can also set notifications. Like that's one very sweet part. I'm sure Tessa mentioned this also. So you can set notifications and send emails, the notifications to your email so that you don't miss them. And yeah, once they're up, you can always check them up. Tessa, what would you say about, Jess, what would you say about these different platforms, finding internships or full-time roles? Which one favors which? Okay.
We're probably running into some mic issues from Jess.
Yeah. Okay, we're just going to move on and get back to that question later. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about getting the first interview. Now that you know where you can look for jobs, where you can search for jobs, how do you get your first interview? So Claire, could you tell us the importance of personal branding as a data scientist, and how do you go about it?
Yeah, that's a hard one. It's a tricky one, but I think it's so important because you want to that's your first foot into expressing who you are. So I think the best way to go about it is there's a few different ways. One obviously is your LinkedIn presence. So whenever folks apply, I typically look at their LinkedIn first to kind of get a sense of what their experience is. So kind of making sure that's clear and what that is. Your cover letter and your resume actually too. Like I know it's usually pretty black and white sort of stuff, but it's you do want to kind of try and showcase your personality and where you're coming from there as well. I think those are the two that I can think of, but if anyone on the panel, I'm sure there's other ways as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Tessa, how does one go about self-marketing online? Now that we know that personal branding is important, and what do you think? What do you look for when deciding on a candidate to interview?
Yeah, so for the first part of the question, I would say easiest way is to start, since I assume everyone here is interested in data science, start writing about it, like whatever. Don't ever think you don't have enough experience to share. You always have a special angle and a topic to share with people. So yeah, if you're at school doing some research related to data science, it's probably interesting to people. And then also start like building either kind of like a profile or like portfolio of data science projects. There are a lot of them going on Kaggle. Just like roll up your sleeve and start doing some projects to try to see how to work with real life data. And then the second, I I guess the second part of the question is what do you look for when you decide on candidates to interview? Again, like echo to what Claire said, probably when you see a resume comes in, besides the resume itself, you probably go on LinkedIn to look at their profile, just to get a little bit more color add to you know, this black and white piece of paper. And definitely on the bottom, a lot of people put their interest. So definitely it's better to know you as a person. Some people say like, I'm into cryptocurrency or something. If that's something like super interesting to the interviewer, that would catch their eye as well.
Yeah, quite interesting. Jess, are you back?
I hope so. Sorry about that. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes, you are. Okay. Yeah, so could you help us answer this? What networking channels do you use to connect with people in the industry? And why is it even important to network?
Yeah, networking is super important, and it's like it can be awkward if you're like a more introverted person like myself. But I'm not like real big on social media. Like I use LinkedIn like to connect with people that I've met. I think my favorite marketing or networking channels are like events. So I organize or go to lots of local meetups, and I go to conferences when I can and try to talk to people, and then I'll follow up on LinkedIn to connect with them afterwards to hopefully stay in touch. But I think like things like that where you're like connecting over some shared passion, whether it's Python or data science or something like that, it kind of like is a natural way to network with people and have good conversations.
Yeah. How do you network, Claire? And what medium do you use?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty similar to Jess as well. I do really like the meetups and in-person stuff. Unfortunately, with COVID, well, we're subjected to Zoom, cameras for a little while longer. But I think one of the other ways that I like to network too, and is just to keep in touch with my old colleagues. Like I do have a lot of monthly catch-ups with folks that I used to work with, just to kind of hear, how's their work going, how's data going, and that sort of stuff. And I think that network over time grows pretty quickly. People, leave and come and join new companies all the time. So don't devalue that. I think there's a lot of folks that you're working with today that, could be a really helpful friend to have in like a couple of years from now, for sure.
Yeah, that's true. How do referrals help in aiding the application process? Jess?
Yeah, referrals can help. It mainly just at that initial stage of, the recruiter or the hiring manager has to scan through, hundreds or thousands of resumes, and it'll often lead them to like spend a little bit more time looking at one. I refer a lot of people for jobs at my company, and some of them just get, some of them like move on, and some of them don't. So it's not like a guarantee, but I think it can help.
Yeah, and how does one, let's assume I don't know you and I want to ask you for a referral. How do I ask you?
I think it's best to ask for referrals from people you do know if you can. Like when I refer people to jobs at Square in like the portal where I upload their resume, like I actually have to like click a box for like, how do I know this person? So if I don't know you, like it's probably not gonna have as much weight. So, but that said, I do refer people who I don't know well. And I think it helps to, instead of reaching out to someone and asking if they'll refer you when you don't know them, is to maybe try to get to know them. You might ask if they're willing to talk with you briefly, like a phone call, or if you live in the same place and we're not in a pandemic, you could ask to take them to coffee. But do like an informational interview and like ask for their advice on career stuff before you go straight to like trying to get their help with something when they're not yet invested in you.
Yeah. That's very true. Tessa, what are some soft skills that you would say are very important to a data science role?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think soft skills are definitely very important to data scientists. I'll probably like I mentioned before, I think tying back to business impact and having that business mindset is definitely helpful. And also just when you answer like maybe behavioral questions almost always around an interview, just try to, give a little bit more context kind of like there are a lot of like frameworks online, like how to tell your story and background experience. So definitely like have, start with the context and getting to the details and end with the impact. So adapting those kind of framework is helpful in the interview because you have so little time to kind of go over your personal experience. And just communication in general, I'll probably recommend like, if you look into those consulting firms, they have a lot of like communication frameworks, like how do you do a top-down communication? How do you break down a problem in like a MECE structure? Those are definitely important because usually one round of interview is like either a case study or like a take-home exercise. When you communicate those things is almost always super important to have a structure so it's easier for people to follow. And I do see in my experience as an interviewer, I do see a lot of data scientists have like super great hard skills. They would like code stuff up really, really quickly during the coding interview, but like, kind of fail the person, like the behavioral or the soft skill interview. So it's just a shame if that, happens. So be sure that you kind of practice the communication and stuff like that.
Okay. Are there some other soft skills you'd like to add to that, Claire?
No, I don't think so. I think Tessa did a great job of covering the gamut of the main ones.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up for the first session, and once we're back, we're going to get started with talking about resumes and cover letters. What resumes are, what cover letters are, how to go about your resume, and all of that important stuff. So yeah, I'm just going to let the moderator take it up from here.
All right. Okay, so thank you everyone for the first panel discussion. While I switch my screens, I would like to encourage everyone to submit your question on the menti.com and enter the code 54656469 to ask question and upload the question that you'd like to be mentioning. Okay, let's just share our screen. Let's go with the first question, the highest upvoted one. What you would name as top 3 or 5 skills for someone who wants to enter on data science? I think we kind of briefly mentioned during the first panel discussion that definitely need to have some of the hard skills, data science skills, coding, programming skill set, and some of the knowledge on statistics. And another most important aspect will be your communication, your soft skills, and how you tell a story. And yeah, so anything else to add from our panelists?
Tessa brought this up already, but I think the business acumen one is pretty important as well. Like how can someone, yes, being able to code up data and find the data is great, but how do you actually apply that data or learning to the business is something that we usually try and find. So I think understanding how the business works, what's going on, and that sort of stuff as well.
Okay. Anything else? All right. If that's it, we'll probably move to the next question. How do you answer questions when you don't have the skills in the questions? For example, no experience in using SQL.
I can probably.
I love this question. Can I jump in?
Yes, go ahead.
Nice.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time thinking about this, like not specifically SQL. Like this would be hard if you were asked to write a SQL query, but you didn't know SQL. But just generally, like you will get asked questions that you don't know the answer to, and so I advise people to not go down the path of trying to study everything because you can't master it all. Like you'll just get questions you can't do well at, or you won't naturally do well at. And so practice answering questions from like first principles, like practice like stepping back and saying like, oh, I've never seen this kind of problem, but here are the things I do know, and try to like build up to a reasonable approach from like first principles. I think that's so valuable, and practicing handling those questions smoothly, like even just like talking out loud to a friend through like problem that like you have no idea is super valuable for handling these things in interviews.
Thanks. Tessa?
Yeah, probably similar to what Jessica said. Just be what McKinsey would say, there's a term called solution driven. So just because you don't know how to do something, you know, there are two types of people: the ones that kind of like say, I don't know how to do it, and then like hand it over to someone else or just gave up. Another type of people who like you really prefer by business is a little bit solution driven, be like, hey, I don't know how to do this, but how else can I do it? So for example, like I've seen candidates who don't have Python skills, but then, you know, in the live coding session, they'll be like, hey, I know SQL. Can I use kind of SQL to figure out how to write this? And some of the questions in Python can be answered with SQL, or like they will say, I know R. Can we like change the CodePy to like R session, and I'll write up like what I know and how I do it. Or even you don't know coding at all, some people would offer to do like pseudo coding. This is how I would structure logically, and I just need to fill in the syntax. And then I've also seen people who just say, I don't know Python. If that's the job, you know, if the job asks for Python, I don't want to do it. Then, I mean, you can probably guess like what happened to those candidates, right? So be a little bit solution driven and just think about alternative ways to solve the question.
That's a really good point.
I'd like to emphasize on what Jess said about trying to know everything. You can't know everything when you're learning because you continue learning on the job. So, you know, understand the basics very well. The basics will always help you through.
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, I think sometimes depending on the format of the interview, it's not, you know, the end result or the answer that you give, but it's us looking at how do you go about the problem? What questions are you asking us? Like, are you sort of doing that? So it doesn't hurt to think out loud too, because we like to see that. We like to see how you're thinking.
Yeah, in some of my previous interview, I feel like the interviewer is really trying to see how far I can go during the interview steps. And then maybe it's the best step for me to demonstrate my ability to learning and, you know, my thought process. So let them understand what my potential is. Let's move on to the next question. What are the best ways to prepare for a technical interview?
We're still going to talk about this in detail later on.
Okay, cool. We'll cover that section later in the second panel discussion. Next question, Naima. Naima, do you want to ask this question yourself? Or maybe I'll just like read this question. I had a question regarding...
Hi.
Oh, hi. Please speak.
Yeah, so this is Naima. I'm based out of Vancouver. So I just have this quick question. I'm actually applying for data science jobs these days, and I gave an interview, and I have another one scheduled next week. So my question is that some interviewers, they just ask open-ended questions. So for example, one of the questions that I got was that you just have all the data that the customers they streamed channels on the TV, on the cable box, and you have the data. And now they're getting some errors. You have to fix it. What are you going to do with the data? You have the millions of data of all the users. And again, there was another similar open-ended question. So I just wanted to know that what should be our approach for these questions? So like if they ask, did you have this data? What would you do now? So things like that. Or if they just ask a very open-ended question, okay, so this is the task. Now what do you do? Thanks.
It's looks like it's more like a take-home assignment type of thing. We can touch base on this generally because I believe we have another section in the second part of the panel discussion talking about take-home exam, right, Khaulat?
Yes, there is.
Yeah, if anyone wants to like speak generally on this question.
Yeah, I think generally when people are asking you really open-ended questions, I think it's best to respond with questions. Like they're giving you this opening to see like how you might, you know, approach a really ambiguous problem in the work setting. And the answer is usually to ask questions to find out like what's the business problem? Like what are the, you know, parameters for a solution, you know, and then for like the example you just gave, like probably like doing some exploration of the data and lots of visualization to just like start digesting and looking for patterns is probably a good start for things like that.
Yeah, I'll probably add to that. If this is not a take-home exercise, if it's like, you know, people ask you to break down a metrics live, again, it'd be great to first ask clarifying questions. What exactly are you trying to find? with the data. And then when you break down the metric or you break down the question, like just make sure that you establish a structure yourself, since it's so open-ended, it's really hard to answer. So again, tying back to what I said before, there are a bunch of books out there to like kind of help you to learn that structure if you never worked with it. So for example, there are a lot of like PMs, like product managers who used to work in tech. They write books about like how to crack a PM interview. There's one section in there, how to break down metrics and answer business related questions. Or top consulting firms also have like books telling you how to kind of break down questions in a MECE structure. So in those kind of questions, it's important to say, hey, I think if I want to look at why did our number of users go down, I would look at by region and also by maybe like demographics and by this and that, and confirm with your interviewer, does this structure look good for you? Do you want me to go down in any area in detail? So always make it a conversation. And so it's not you always monologuing yourself as well.
Great.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Waste of time. Let's jump into the next question. What are the best way to prepare for a technical interview? I think we're going to cover that in that next one. Question, I'm a master's student doing research in machine learning field. I'd like to know how to transition from being a research assistant at university to data science role in the industry. Yeah. Anyone?
Seems like a Jess question.
You know, because my field in academia wasn't machine learning specifically, at least in physics, there weren't really opportunities to do internships. But my understanding is that a lot of students in machine learning or CS related, you know, like those kind of hard disciplines often do internships. And I think that's a good way to get your foot in the door. Otherwise, you know, hopefully you get chances in your school projects to do like kind of like real world problem solving that you can talk about. So I think just generally, like not specific to this question, but generally transitioning from university to your first job, like showcasing like toy problems that you've worked on, and putting those on your resume, having like a project section can be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in addition to that, networking could also help a lot. You know, when you have more people in your network that are into this new field that you want to transition into, they can give you a recommendation, you know, talk on your behalf and stuff like that. So yeah, networking is one big part.
Yeah, definitely go to all the meetups that you can in your area for everything machine learning, Python, like, you know, like the top few like related things.
Right. Also, if you have a chance to go to like the top journal conferences, where you're probably going to meet some of the like project manager from different company, and you will see your papers getting published or giving a talk, they'll probably invite you for interview, and then see if there are any related interest in your research, and they will just invite you to the research lab or their ongoing project. I guess we can jump to the next question. Any good online courses that you could advise for a novice? Novice. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, novice, like beginner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're actually great courses that I would recommend on LinkedIn Learning. You can check LinkedIn Learning for data science courses. There are a lot, and there are some by one of the speakers last Friday, Helen Wall, and she has some cool courses on LinkedIn Learning too. You can check them out. Yeah, basically, and you can also check Udacity. Udacity has some great courses too.
Yeah, Udacity also has like scholarships periodically. So just Google Udacity scholarship. There's like a newsletter you can sign up for. So they do collaborations with different companies, because usually Udacity is pretty pricey. Maybe cheaper for students, but still pricey. So make sure those scholarships are for free though. And also probably if you're interested in that company specifically, is a good thing to add on your resume. And also like Udemy has some pretty, you know, not so pricey courses, and just make sure you never buy full price because it's always on discount.
Yeah.
Good to know. Thanks.
The other one that I've been looking at lately and it's been pretty good is DataCamp has some pretty cool ones. And the reason that those are pretty nice is because they give you real world project data that you kind of play around with, and they have little challenges and assessments and that sort of stuff. So it's kind of nice to practice and see real data rather than other stuff.
Yeah, Claire mentioning data camp made me remember Kaggle. Kaggle is like where you can find a lot of free data sets and also a community that can help you. And Kaggle also has some beginner courses. So yeah, and they're all free.
One thing that I like to do on Kaggle competition is like every time a competition is over, I like to go through their winning solutions just to see what are the what are the best solutions to some of the problems. They really inspire me with how to solve the problem next time. Yeah. Okay. Next question. What types of challenges do women in data science face? Wow. I guess this question might be better addressed in the next workshop happening on 21st. But yeah, I was just wondering, are there any panelists who want to answer this question?
I would say that the issues that we face are similar to other women in engineering, women in a lot of other technical roles, in that we're often in the minority in our teams. And yeah, it's I like there could be a whole like panel discussion on like what to do in those scenarios, but I try to seek out teams where I'm not the only woman on a team, and that's like one of the things that I look for when I'm looking for jobs is just trying to have a team that values like not just like gender diversity, but all kinds of diversity, and just like a nicer place to work usually.
Yeah.
In the context of interviewing, something that we've been doing as well is we try and make sure there's a woman on the interview panels. I find that it helps to kind of build. It's more comfortable sometimes if you're a woman and you're being interviewed by women. Certain things come up. It's even biases too. I find that sometimes if I'm interviewing with a male counterpart, we might notice different things and see different things. So to kind of bring it back to the interviewing point, and I agree with Jess, there's so many things that are so similar with the other women in tech fields, but I know from the interview standpoint, that's something that we've been trying to do and trying to sort of make sure that makes it easier for folks.
Right. Yeah. Just a reminder, like our workshop on 21st will be advancing your careers in data science. So a lot of interesting aspects of how to progress your career in the data field as a woman will be brought up in the workshop. So stay tuned on 21st. I guess we will just take one more questions and we'll resume for the second part of the panel discussion. So the next question is, any advice for those who are transferring from a business backgrounds into data science? How can we demonstrate technical skills during the interview? Okay. I think, okay, coming from a business background, you definitely have that business acumen that Tessa was mentioning earlier. Yeah, do you have anything to add, Tessa?
Yeah, I was going to say exactly. So you definitely already have the business acumen, business knowledge. How do you demonstrate technical skills? Usually there will be one round in the interview for like live coding. So that's like a pretty good place to demonstrate, your coding skills. And also there will be like cases that's kind of like data science focus. So take home exercises to build a model and stuff like that. So definitely make sure that your analysis is thorough. And then since you come from a business background, you probably know how to summarize stuff nicely and like, communicate it well. So yeah.
Okay. I guess that will be the end of the first Q&A session. Thank you for all the amazing questions. I hope some of the Q&A questions really help you to answer some of your questions in interview with data science. So let's assume the second part of it, panel discussion, and see what are the other interesting aspects that our panelists can bring for us today. Okay, we'll stop share and then Khaulat, then you can start the second session now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So we'll be jumping into resumes and CVs, just like I said earlier. First, let's start with the difference. What's the difference between a resume and a CV? Do you mind helping with that, Tessa?
Yeah, so I I would hope other panelists also help me out, but my understanding is CV yearly is more like toward, analytics, academic. So you would have very detailed, every single project you worked on, every single paper you published, stuff like that on there, versus resume yearly. I would suggest for people here, unless you have 20 years of experience in data science, limited to 1 page, is always like, that's yearly the advice everyone would give.
Okay, would you like to add to that, Claire?
Sure. I think for me, what I've seen, at least for industry, because I don't have experience in academia, is that it is interchangeable. And I think it depends on the region too. I was in Australia last year, and I think they tend to use the word CV a lot more. I feel like in North America, we use resume a lot more. So it's also just a regional thing. But at least from the industry perspective, I've seen it interchangeable from my perspective.
Yeah, from my own understanding, resumes are like short formed, where you like just go straight to the point, talk about, your roles, your experiences in bullet points, something that an interviewer can just skim through, while the CV is like more detailed, where you like talk about, you talk in more length about, things like what you want from the company, what you have to offer to the company and stuff like that. Would you like to add to this, Jess?
Yeah, just because I was in academia for a while, if you do have like a PhD and years of research experience, your CV is like easily 20 to 30 pages. And I see people will submit those to data science jobs, and it's like, no one's gonna read that, Like you have every talk that you've ever given listed in there, and they're really long, and that's useful if you're applying for like a professor job. But I agree. I think Tessa said to keep it to 1 page, like definitely 2 pages max for a resume, but 1 page is nice. Like people can actually read that. You can highlight things, like it's hard sometimes to get it that short, but like you really give like the highlights that someone will see, without going to another page. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. What does a HR or hiring manager look for on a data science resume? That's for you, Jess.
Yeah, well, I'm not a hiring manager, but I talked to the guy at Square who does all the talent acquisition for machine learning to ask him this, like, what are you actually looking for? And some of the things he said actually aligned with things that I hoped he would say, but I didn't think he would say. Like things like personally, I find it super weird when people send you a resume in like a .doc or docx format. Like you should always save it as a PDF. Like you don't want to send someone something they can edit. That's weird. So having like a simple, he said 1 page is ideal. It helps if it like is nicely organized and pretty. Like you don't want to make it like all flowery, but like, like looks nice and it's easy to skim. And what else did he say he looks for? Yeah, that you're able to highlight relevant projects. I mean, that's like the main thing they're looking for.
Yeah. Given that you've actually interviewed Tessa, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, I would echo to what Jess has said. Definitely highlight the things that you want to emphasize on your resume. So for example, like because everyone's skimming your resume, nobody's going to spend 10 minutes, 20 minutes reading 1 resume. Make sure that if you want to specify that I use Python or R in here, make sure to bold it and like, highlight it or something. And then also in your description, you usually have like a paragraph for each job that you worked for, but make sure that you kind of summarize it on top what you have done and tie it back to the impact, and then you can go into a little bit detail if you have space. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Talking about cover letters, how does one go about creating a cover letter? What should be in a cover letter? Claire?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that should be in cover letter. One, it's your chance to kind of tell them why you're the right fit for the role. So to be like what I do sometimes, I literally sometimes copy the job description and I look at like, what are the main things they're looking for and what skills do I
You're
actually
right
have
about
that
it.
fit those things. Yeah, exactly. And then also just, why them? I think it goes back to the motivation and self-awareness of why did you pick this company? There must be something that interests you, whether it's maybe the field they're working in, maybe there's a project that you've seen them do. It helps to have some of those extra bits. It makes it stand out.
Okay. Do you want to add to this, Jess?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think cover letters are tricky, like, because some companies won't read them and some do. I write them if they're for jobs that I really want. And I think Claire kind of nailed it in what you should cover. I think you want to tell the company why you're useful to them. And so, like, one trap that is hard not to fall into is to not say something like, like, you've read the job description. You don't want to say something like, I know you're looking for X, Y, and Z, and I'm an expert, and I'm an expert in those things, like, kind of like repeating the job description and just saying, those things. Try to, like, give it like a more genuine flavor as you're doing that.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay, Tessa, how does hiring differ in different industries, like big companies, the smaller companies, the startups, and yeah, non-technical companies in general? How does hiring differ across those various companies?
I think there's the biggest difference between big and small companies is probably the first round. So bigger companies would generally get like thousands of resumes probably for one opening. So they would probably, most big companies that I know probably use some kind of system to screen your resume. So that's extremely important to know, or like, to think about when you kind of put your resume or cover letter together, to make sure that you highlight or like match to their job description. Because, as a data scientist, you can think about it yourself. How, if you were to build some automated system, how would you build it? Probably to match the keywords, right? That's an easy way to do it. So smaller companies, because they get like fewer resumes, they would have HR to screen probably all of them. But I think tying back to what I said before, like referral would be treated a little bit differently, regardless if it's small or big company, because like HR would probably, look at it a little bit longer, or like ask for people who referred you, like their opinion about you, how they know you, etc. So that would be the differences.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, let's get into the interview process in general. So for the data science interview process, what are like the various stages that a candidate will encounter for the interview? Jess?
Yeah, I think most companies that I've interviewed with, at least the bigger, more organized ones, have kind of settled on a process where the first step is a screen with the either the HR person or the hiring manager, to kind of just like, like after they've decided your resume is moving ahead, they're just going to do like a short call to just kind of like sanity check that you're a reasonable person, that you can talk like with good communication about stuff you've worked on. The next step is some kind of technical screen. So it could be a take-home project, it could be some online coding assessment, or a real-time pair coding with someone. And then the final stage is some kind of what would normally be like on site, where they'd fly you out to the company, if you're not there, and do like a full day or a half day of like back-to-back interviews, kind of covering a whole bunch of different things.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, the first stage, looking at the first stage, the behavioral interview session, how does one like answer questions related to behavioral interview? Tessa, could you start with this?
Sure. Yeah, so behavioral questions. Definitely most important thing is to practice. Like there are some really, really common behavioral questions that almost every single company asks, like, what is your strength? What is your weakness? And tell me about your resume. So make sure that you kind of like talk to a friend about what's on your resume, and make sure that you know every single detail that you put on your resume, because it would be really awkward and embarrassing if people ask about your project, you're like, I don't remember. So, and then other behavioral questions, like make sure, like I said before, definitely tie it back to the impact. And then when it comes to like weakness and strength, because everyone's been asking it, definitely like make sure that you avoid those common, some online guide will tell you for a weakness, never really say a real weakness. Always say like tweak a strength into a weakness. Don't ever do that, because everyone has read those online guide and every interviewer knows about it. Make sure you're genuine. We're much more prefer to see people who own up to their mistakes and people who say like I actually failed and this is what I learned. You always want to add on to like, this is what I learned and this is how I'm improving myself.
Yeah.
Maybe just to add to that, a framework that I've learned in my past that I really like is, I think it's called the STAR technique when you're answering behavioral stuff. So you're kind of like assess situations. So you're helping, build the context, build the situation for the interviewer. T, I think, is the task. So, task and action is sort of what did you do? What was your role? What happened? And then result, back to what Tessa was saying, what was the impact that your thing made? So it's kind of nice to frame it, because sometimes I find that with behavioral questions, sometimes people jump straight into the result, or they talk about the action, they don't talk about the situation or what happened. So I think try and sort of build that narrative so that the interviewer can kind of follow along the story that you're telling and actually see what happened.
Yeah. And at this stage, this is where the soft skills we talked about come in, your communication skills and all those other soft skills that we mentioned earlier. So they're all part of the behavioral interview. Okay, yeah. So talking about the technical interview, which is supposed to be the next stage, what does the technical interview stage consist of, Jess?
There can be like a few different versions of it, like I mentioned. So, and they have pros and cons. So sometimes it's a take home, and you might have like a couple days or a week or something to work on a project, which is nice because you can put a lot of time into it, but also not nice because you put all your time into it. And I mean, yeah, I've like evolved from like loving that version of it because I can work as hard as I want to just like wanting something time bounded that's like an hour long and then it's over.
Yeah.
So a lot, I think, I don't know, I feel like more of the bigger companies are moving to doing like the shorter, like non-take home, probably because it's easier for them to just assess than having to like read through your 30-page Jupyter notebook that you like created while you were solving some problem.
Yeah, it's tricky. I can sort of add to that too. Like we've flip-flopped a lot at Atlassian because we used to do the take home, and then it became really difficult because there was so much to look at and a lot. But then we switched over to doing your typical kind of SQL hacker rank tests and that sort of stuff. But then we also found that wasn't really great for some individual, because some people aren't great at thinking on the fly. And it doesn't mean they don't know what they're doing. It just means that it's a nerve-wracking and really crazy like anxiety-ridden experience. So we didn't want to dock you in off for that. So I think what we've done now is we do a bit of a combo where we have, if we do the hacker rank, we'll have sort of like a chance for them to bring them in and talk more about the assignment. And same with the take home, like we'll sort of tell them, hey, cap it at a day or two. Don't, spend your whole week doing this. And then, but we'll also, bring you in for a 30-minute or 45-minute chat so you can kind of walk us through what you did and go through it together. So we've been playing around with it, but it's a tough one. It's tough to test technical, I will admit.
Okay, let's assume I'm applying to a company that still uses the project-based method, whether it's the lengthy one or the short one. How do I go about it? Claire?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, we mentioned this a lot, but sometimes the take home is also a great way of testing your business acumen. So it goes back to, hey, we gave you this CSV flat file of data and we told you to do some stuff with it. A lot of time people nail the coding part. That part is not too bad, but it's what did that data tell you?
Yeah.
And that, like, sometimes like I use that as a sense of how well are they able to communicate? Are they able to, even plot things in a nice manner, or do they just like give me back a table that I had to kind of go through and read again? In terms of how to prepare, I think take your time, like in terms of reading through and understanding the questions that are being asked. I don't know, just Tessa, if you guys have any other.
Yeah. Okay, so I'd like to add to that. Understanding the company would really help you tailor what you're doing with the data. So, you'll be able to focus on solving the company's problem instead of just going through data and performing some analysis. That's not very helpful to the company. Okay, yeah, so that's about project-based interviews. You have all the time in the world, not all the time in the world, but like a lot of time to yourself, and you have the internet also. You can do research also, and have a good result at the end of the day. So yeah, there's the other part, which is the live coding technical interviews, where you're coding and there's somebody at the other end of the screen or in person watching you and seeing what you're doing. So how do you like go about this part of it, Tessa, if you're coding live?
Yeah, so usually there will be like a platform they use, either it's like HackerRank or CoderPad, and so they will be able to see your code. The first thing that is super important, I would stress, is make sure you walk through your thinking process with them. I know, as like coder and analytics people, you probably like to put your headphones on and just like do your own coding. Like make sure that you don't do that in the interview. We much prefer to see people who, like, even if you didn't get to a final answer, just walk us through like, this is how I plan to do it, and this is like what I'm doing. And so make sure, because there's some syntax or whatever they might not be familiar with either. So make sure if you're using like a really niche function, make sure that they know what this function is doing. And also just work with your interviewer. Usually they're not like, a proctor for a test. They're just sitting there and watch you code. They would like to make it a conversation. And if you don't know syntax, just ask them. Like a lot of interviewers, at least for our company, we're more than happy to like tell you, use like a time diff or like a time add or something like that. Like it's important for you to know the logic and know the thinking process, not super important for you to know the syntax.
Yeah. This live coding interviews also are similar to like whiteboard interviews, right? So
Yeah.
I believe it's a similar approach because you're doing it in front of the person.
Mhm.
Okay, so that applies. Yeah, so because of COVID, interviewing has actually changed a whole lot. What has changed? I'm not very sure what has changed. So could you help us with that, Tessa? How has interviewing changed for you?
Yeah, for sure. So one thing that people probably like experience is like there's always that layer of technological difficulties sometimes you experience, right? Like you're kind of like what happened to Jess earlier. You're talking and then like you don't hear people, or
And
your
time zones.
Exactly. Or your interview is like breaking off. You didn't answer, you didn't hear that question. So like make sure that you don't silently suffer through that. Like just tell your interviewer, hey, sorry, I can't hear you. And also we have experiences like where people interview at home and then a fire drill went on and then they have to cancel the interview. Like I would say the interviewers in general are very understanding of the situations because things happen, right? And then if they're not, that's probably not a group of people you want to work with anyways. So just give that the opportunity to find another one.
Yeah.
And another one is like is also more important to like walk people through your thinking process because they're not there with you. They can't see what you're writing, scribbling on your paper. Make sure that when you're writing something that they don't see, walk them through what you're writing down, what you're thinking.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Tessa. Okay, so let's overall basically just make sure you read the job descriptions. Like Claire said, if you read the job descriptions, you can understand what they're looking for, right? You know what the company is looking for, and you can tailor your answers to that. So you wouldn't just answer questions that are not relevant, but you would answer questions in a relatable manner with your interviewer. Okay, so yeah, so let's jump into the interview preparation stage basically. So it's just in addition to what we talked about earlier. So like what domain knowledge does the interviewer need to have of the role or the company? Claire?
So I guess it depends. If it's more of a junior entry level role, then we wouldn't expect you to have all the domain knowledge because that's why you're looking for this role. That's why you're learning. But I do recommend that it is worth it to do your homework on my company. Like understand what they do, understand what they're focused on. At least have a bit of that pre-homework done, I think.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. So it's always advisable that we also ask questions about the company from the interviewer and not just, it's like you're interviewing the interviewer too, because you want to understand the company you're working for. You don't just want to work for people that you can't relate with and all. So like what questions should an interviewer ask? Jess, if I was interviewing for a data science role and you were my interviewer, what do you expect me to ask you?
Oh, so for expectations, I just expect you to ask anything. Like when people don't ask any questions, you're like, really? You don't wonder anything about this job you've applied to? So ask whatever you think is interesting. I kind of struggled with asking good questions when I was first starting out because I'm just like, I just want a job, like trying to get my first job out of school. So it just was like, I would ask questions because I would read online that you're supposed to, and I would Google like good questions to ask during interview, and ask some of those. But like as I've like moved through my career, I've learned that there are some things that I really do want to know that are often hard to learn from the website or from the interviews, and I want to know things like, well, in the early stages when I'm talking to like just the talent acquisition or the hiring manager, I want to know like, you have any women on your team? Like any at all? Like what's your, like, tell me your diversity numbers. Like that's something I ask early on. And then when I'm in later stage technical interviews with like potential teammates, I want to know things like how is work assigned? Like what's the time scale of projects? Am I like frantically doing like 10 projects a day, or do I have like a month to work on a project? Am I collaborating with people? Like how does my work get assigned? Those types of questions.
Yeah, thanks. Are there any additional questions you would have asked, Claire?
No, I think those are the main ones. Like, I think it's so funny because when you're the interviewer, you're also interviewing the company too. It's your opportunity to like ask them about, debunk something that you've been wanting to know or understand how
Yeah.
their team works or their culture. Like a lot of companies are really great nowadays on putting all their values and their culture on their website, but it's an opportunity to ask if they really like live and breathe it, or ask about the kind of projects that you would get to work on, stuff like that.
Yeah, true. Would you like to answer that, Tessa?
Yeah, I would probably echo, just ask questions that you're genuinely interested in, and also you can't find online probably, right? And also specifically to your role and to your team, you want to kind of get to know them a little bit more as well. And usually a question that I would love to ask is like, what is the most important, interesting project you worked on? You kind of like see what they worked on day to day, and also you see like, are they really happy people in the company? Are they really like passionate about what they're working on, right? So you can probably debug that as well.
Okay, thanks. Let's wrap this up with the final stage. Okay, you've gotten the job, you've scaled through the interview. Then there's the issue of salary expectations. How would you communicate with your interviewer about salary? So, first off, you can be asked about your salary expectations. So, like, an interviewer can ask you, what do you expect to be paid, for your salary? How do you answer this, Jess?
What I do now, or for the last few years, when I'm already making a salary that I'm happy with, is I'll just let them know. I'll just say like, I'm currently making X dollars per year and I'm looking for something in that ballpark. It was harder when I was trying to get my first job, or moving on from like my first lower paying job, because I wanted a number that I couldn't just like say like, this is where I'm at, So you can do research online. It's hard to like find like legitimate numbers, but I usually go with like a band, like try to do some research and say like, I'm looking for something in this range that you think is reasonable and okay for your quality of life.
Yeah, thanks. How does one go about salary negotiation, Tessa?
When it comes to negotiation, I think the best situation you will be in is probably when you have counter offers from other company. So make sure that you don't like always only interview for one company. It's always easier to negotiate if you say, this is how much the other company is paying me, and I have other counter offers waiting for me. And also it also helps you to accelerate that stage a little bit faster, because if you tell them you're under time pressure, they will usually like, push that process or shorten it. And also like Jess said, it's probably easier when like after several years to like know what if you're currently making a pretty good living, you can just tell them, hey, even if I don't have counter offers, I'm pretty happy to stay where I am. So if you don't, have like a competitive offer, I probably just won't move. And also it's important to do like some research online to find out what is the, the expectation of the kind of band that you're interviewing for. definitely some, is like Jess said, it's not completely accurate. But they give you a range, and it depends on the job. Some of the jobs, for example, for Facebook and bigger companies, they have like those kind of programs, like a rotational, like product manager or something like that. That salary is set. So that information you can find online, and everyone's paying the same salary because it's like for new grad or something like that. So you don't have any space for negotiation. And make sure that you know that beforehand so you don't waste your time.
Okay, thanks. Why is it important to even negotiate one salary in the first place, Claire?
This is a tough one. I think salary is such a spicy topic, and it's a tough one because I think, like Jess and Tessa mentioned, you can do your research, but values might be right. And I think this is also another spicy comment, but I think sometimes I'm of the opinion that if you have close friends in the industry or folks that you trust, you talk openly about your salary, because I think if we help each other out a little bit, it helps you be a bit more armed and ready. And I think that's why negotiations are important too, because it's sort of helping yourself. Unfortunately, money is sometimes how you're valued at a company, and how that initial evaluation is done, I guess. So it's important to kind of stand up for yourself and kind of try and prove your worth. But it's tough. I think, like Tessa said, sometimes companies will already come with that's their height. Some companies expect you to play the game and do a bit of back and forth. Some companies are already high, like giving you what the max they would give you. So it's a hard one. It's a really, really tough one.
Okay, thanks. Would you like to answer that, Jess?
I just wanted to throw out that like salary is important. It's important to get the highest salary when you start, because that'll set a baseline that you can grow from. But there are other things that might be important to you to negotiate as well. Like, I care a lot about like work-life balance, flexibility. Like, one of the things that drew me to my current job, I make about the same as I did in my last job, but like I can go snowboarding in the morning and then come to work, because like my exact hours that I work don't matter. And so like flexibility or or other perks might be more important to you to negotiate as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would 100% echo that for sure. Like, look at the benefits. A lot of tech companies nowadays have lucrative, wellness budgets and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, take a look at how that works with you and your lifestyle. Yeah, that's such a good point, Jess.
Yeah. It could be working remotely. It could be having some days off. It could be, a shorter period of work time in a day. All those things that will make it convenient for you. Okay. Yeah. So let's wrap this up with like, what are some go-to places for you, Jess, to check for industrial average salaries, or do you just Google it?
I mean, Glassdoor is like a typical place. So I'm pretty sure, I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty sure that like people who work in talent acquisitions have access to these like secret networks where they really know the actual salary bands that are appropriate for a job in different areas. And Glassdoor is not quite that. I think there must be some bias in like who actually reports their salaries there. So
Yeah.
in my experience, like the numbers on Glassdoor are lower than what you should expect. But it depends on lots of factors. So yeah, I think that's like probably the best starting place. If you have friends like Claire mentioned who work in the field, I also like encourage you to like talk openly about salaries. And it differs by industry and company, but it's good. It's definitely like helpful to know what other people are making in similar jobs, like in real life. There was also some spreadsheet making its way around the internet a while ago that I'd have to, I can look it up actually and paste a link in the chat here. That was like just kind of crowdsourcing women in tech. It's not just data science, but it's like different technical fields. And people were just kind of like throwing their salaries in there, and it's gotten pretty big. So I don't know like if that's any more accurate than Glassdoor, but it's something.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Jess. Thanks everyone. Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Tessa. Yeah, this was a very interesting conversation. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Okay. Yeah, so this brings us to the end of this panel session, and I'm just going to hand over to Celine to carry on from here.
Yeah, thank you, Khaulat, and all the panelists for the conversation. I have to say some a very interesting question on the second part. So maybe the first one is, what is the biggest mistake that you've seen during the interview? Yeah, that's definitely interesting. Anyone want to share your experience interviewing a candidate?
Yeah, I can share like the worst. I don't think it's common, but the worst thing I've seen was myself and a male colleague were interviewing a male candidate, and I would pose the question, like we would, you know, alternate asking questions, but he would only answer to my male colleague, you know, just like only eye contact there. And so that was just like a red flag, and like he did well, but we're not going to hire that guy.
Right. Sometimes when you interview, you also want to test whether the candidate is a good colleague to work, right? So it doesn't really, if you don't really interact that well, it's probably you don't want to work with the candidate in the future.
Yeah, the worst I've seen is the one that I mentioned before. The candidate just kind of gave up when when we're testing Python, and so he just went, "Oh, I only know SQL. If Python is what you guys are asking, then I'm out," and just like dropped out of the interview in the middle. So that's definitely a mistake that you don't see often, but like it's definitely fatal. It's just like, don't ever say, I don't want to do this, I don't know how to do it. Just, you know, work your way and do whatever you can. And probably more common one is like when you ask behavioral questions or experience questions, you see them stay on relatively high level and theoretical level. So then, you know, and like after the interview, we'll have like a round table for the candidates. Usually people would mention, and I start doubting whether they actually did any of the work that they did, or is like mostly them counting on their teammates to do work. Like if they can't really offer any specific examples, it just stayed on a theoretical level.
I see. That's a very good point. Yeah. Okay, next one. Question mark is answered. What are the best way to prepare for a technical interview? I guess Tessa will probably, yeah, go ahead, Tessa.
Sorry, I was just gonna say probably practice a lot definitely helps, and work with real data sometimes helps as well. So a lot of like you can like, you know, take as many online courses as you want, and then because some of them only stay on a really like fundamental level. If you think about SQL, a lot of them would ask you like how to do group by, but they have a very clear like question they're asking you. It usually doesn't happen like that in interviews. For the technical interview, they'll give you like a sample data and ask you like, hey, I want to learn about this, and how do you do it? They won't tell you do group by, do it inner join. You know, they won't specifically tell you how to do that. So work with real data and get your hands dirty. Just work on projects will probably help.
Okay. Anyone else? Just to follow up on what Tessa just commented. So you mean like it's probably gonna be a kind of a live code interview where they just give you a data set and then you just directly, you know, have to pull out some insightful information, right? During on site. Right. Okay. Right. Mark an answer. Okay, so this one, as a recent graduate student, can we take any specific steps to ensure that the recruiter does not overlook our profile just because of lack of minimum professional experience? Do certificates help? Yeah, I think it's a very common question for a lot of fresh graduates.
Yeah, I would echo. I think Jess had mentioned this earlier, but do like list out some of your projects. I think a lot of, even though they're you know, projects you did in school, I mean, they're still projects. You still learned stuff. You still went through the motions of, you know, doing analysis and that sort of stuff. So do list it out if it's relevant. Certifications help sometimes too. Like if you're, I think there was that question around if you're a business person going into a technical role. Like, yeah, it doesn't help. It doesn't hurt. Sorry, I should say it doesn't hurt to put that, you know, you did a SQL boot camp or a Python boot camp or something like that. Those do send out, so we'll put them in.
Yeah, just make sure that you also apply to the role that kind of fits your background, right? Like if you're a new grad and you're applying for like a 5-year experience role, like recruiter is going to overlook your resume just because you don't have the number of years they require. But if you like applying for an internship or applying for like with 1 or 2 years experience, then everyone's in the same boat, right? So like they're gonna make sure to look at your resume for sure. And then certificates do help to the extent that it shows your like willingness to learn. But more importantly, like Jess and Claire mentioned, is probably the specific project you worked on. So make sure, don't say like, I earned this Udacity certificate, but make sure that you mention those are the projects you worked on.
Mm-hmm. Jess?
Yeah, I think one thing I'd add, which is like, I think specific to people who have like PhDs or other like higher degrees, like once you have those types of like certificates, I don't think it helps to add more online certificates. There's so many certificates out there you can get. I don't think it adds a lot, although you can learn a lot doing those. So like take an online course, but don't pay to get the certificate, that kind of thing. And yeah, I think when I was trying to get my first job, I had a ton of like technical statistics, programming, like relevant experience. But I think the thing that really helped me was like a couple of side projects that I listed on my resume that were easy. Like they were like nothing compared to things I had done in grad school, but they were things that were easier to talk to hiring managers about. It was like, oh, a like traffic safety in Seattle. That's like a real world concept. It was like a hackathon I did. And it was like, it was one day of my time. It was so much smaller, but it was so much easier to talk about with people. So, you know, having a few of those, someone might scan them and be like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then you have a conversation.
Yeah. Okay, Marcus answer. Thank you for the answers. Okay, next one. I'm always worried about leaving possibly relevant experience off my resume. How do I know what to leave off and what to keep?
Link to your LinkedIn and put everything there, or your website. People can always like go learn all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a hard time too, like cutting down, you know, like I feel like removing my publications was a big step, but like nobody in industry cares about my like astrophysics publications. So now I just have a bullet point that says like 8, you know, peer-reviewed articles in journals, as opposed to all the individual things. So if someone's interested, they can go to my website or to LinkedIn and find out more. But
yeah,
it's hard to cut down.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'd like to add. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that you tailor it to your job description. So it will help you know what to leave and what to keep off. So if you look at the job description, so what exactly is this job asking me for? Am I putting all these other things that the job that's not really relevant to the job? So you remove them. So like the shorter and relevant, the better, you know.
Yeah. Tessa, you have something to add?
Similar to what just mentioned, I think definitely just have maybe a backup version that have like all your experiences, so you can like pick and choose which one to put on your resume for which job, to tailor towards the job description as well.
Mm-hmm. Right, I agree. Oh, is that the last one? How do I go to the next one? Oh, I guess that's all our questions at this point. I still have some. In terms of availability of roles and opportunity, what is the differential advantage for a PhD versus a master, say from the same quantitative field?
I think it depends on the company. There will be some companies that say like we only hire PhDs, which I think is kind of dumb. But there will be some companies where like a PhD is a disadvantage because that seems like overly specific and technical.
Right.
So it depends, and you can kind of like learn a lot about the culture of a company by their like perspective on that. If you can talk to anyone there, like. Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily always an advantage to have a PhD.
Yeah, I would echo that, and it's also for specific roles within a company. Usually, you would see, you know, if it's a core data scientist, we're building a lot of machine learning models, then they would prefer a PhD. Versus if it's more business facing, it doesn't really give you that much of a leg up. And echo to what Jess said, some companies are wary of the communication level of PhDs because you see a lot of people, because they've been in academia for so long, and they have their own style of communication, and you would see like business people kind of like mention that time to time. So just make sure if you've been in academia for a very long, like make sure you're like fine-tuning your communication skills as well.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. I guess that's probably it for the second round of QA. Let me just stop share. Okay, thank you everyone for bringing out the amazing point and the helping to answer the question from the audience.